Well, this is a reply to Socialist News. Frank, where do you get off from 15 minutes of obscenities? Swearing at people over YouTube and so forth. Do you think that proves your point? No, it doesn't, Frank. It proves you're an idiot. It proves your lack of education and self-esteem. I'm sorry to use language like that, Frank. I really am. But you, what's the point? Now, let's give a couple of your points. One, the NBN. Last federal election, before August 2010, Julia Gillard went to the election with NBN on the table. The Labor Party won 71 seats in the last election. The Coalition won 74. And including in that, the independent seats of Windsor, Oakeshott and also Catter in North Queensland. The majority of people in those seats did not vote for the NBN. In fact, they rejected it. If that was the case, Frank, if they agreed with it, then you wouldn't have Windsor, Catter or Oakeshott in Parliament, who went against their own electorates. So you're wrong on that, Frank, that the majority of people supported the NBN, because they plainly did not, according to the federal poll. Sorry, Frank, you lost on that one. The majority of people did not vote for an NBN, as by the numbers of the federal poll of the last election in August. Sorry. Now, we just had Kevin Rudd on TV claiming about question of answers on ABC about the ETS, and he claimed, oh yes, it was a mistake that we dropped that. But he also went on to say, Frank, and if you listen to what Kevin Rudd had to say and read later about what he had to say, and he's refused to move off this point, that many members of the cabinet in the Labor Party, and may include Gillard on this, objected to the ETS. You got that word? Objected. We're not in favour of it. Oh, Frank, oh dear. You forgot that one, didn't you? Still my beating heart. But you kind of lost that one, didn't you, Frank? Yes, and it was rejected in the Senate twice. And it wasn't the fact that the Greens were going to be the lifesavers in the blood of the common people. Of course they weren't, Frank. They wanted to produce the hardest evidence of the Garner report that it was there, and wanted to shut down the coal mines and so forth to do so. Immediately, Frank. So what benefit was that to the people of Australia? None whatsoever. You claim that the majority of people in Australia support carbon taxation. Well, neither does Julia Gillard prior to the last federal election. Neither did Wayne Swan and members of the cabinet, members of the Labor Party, who had on the table 6 days before the federal election, and it's Julia Gillard's words, not mine, there will be no carbon taxation under my government that I lead. What does that tell you, Frank? Did she lie? Well, she certainly lied after the election, hasn't she, mate? So, there's another one you got wrong. And there's no absolute proof that mankind is responsible for global warming, Frank. Of the 2,500 so-called scientists of the IIPC, the majority of which are bureaucrats and government officials from different countries, Frank. Hardly what you call scientists, Frank. And over the last, 4 or 5 years, the amount of disinformation that's come from the UN and so forth about carbon taxation, ETSs, global warming, you're on a losing streak there, Frank, because the majority of Australians don't support that either, mate. They don't. And your scare and mongering tactics of saying, oh, my children are going to suffer, doesn't wash with me, Frank. Doesn't wash with me whatsoever. We go on the reality of how things work, Frank. And the science for global warming has failed. I'm sorry, Frank. It's failing, Frank. It was a con job when it was started, and it's a con job now. And if you want to believe in it, fine. You want to pay for it, fine. Go somewhere where they pay for it, mate, because the majority of Australians don't favour it. And apparently, before the last federal election, neither did Julia Gillard or Wayne Swan. Oh, damn. That's a difference in that. And according to Kevin Rudd, half the cabinet didn't believe in ETS and the other half did. And Julia Gillard was probably one of them, but he didn't mention that precisely. Frank, when did you get the idea that producing less when it costs more to buy is you're going to save money and create employment? No, it doesn't, Frank. Obviously you don't understand economics and you should read a book on it sometime, like you charge everybody else with. When you produce less, you employ less people, Frank. And if it costs more, well, it costs more to do so. And people are going to buy less and less, Frank. And when they buy less and less, they have no need to exercise further production. And in sowing do, they cut down on staff, Frank. Why have a workforce standing around doing nothing and producing less? And it costs more, Frank. So you're not saving anything, Frank. In fact, you're having the opposite effect. It's costing you more. You're buying less, though, because it costs you more. And once you buy less, Frank, here's the turn around. People start losing their jobs because you're manufacturing and producing less, Frank. I'm sorry if you don't understand that concept. And that's exactly what carbon taxation will do to an economy, Frank. So the more taxation you put on manufacturing in any sphere, Frank, and it costs more to do so, people will buy less. You're right there. They won't save because it'll cost them more. And once they buy less, Frank, people start losing their jobs. You don't understand about that conservative economic policy or principles because you've never read into it properly. It's quite simple economics, Frank. A grade 5 student understands it, but you don't. As for gay marriages, Frank, where'd you come up with that one? 100% of all known societies throughout the world, Frank, have believed in a solemnised union of marriage between a man and a woman to propagate the race. Even though there are illegitimate children, I'll grant you that, but it takes a man and a woman still to propagate the race, to increase the human race, Frank. It doesn't increase through Steve and Fred getting married or Eve and Nadia having a relationship. Granted, lesbians can have artificial insemination or one of their male friends inseminating one of the partners. But then again, we revert back to the biological area that it needs the male and the female to propagate the race in one form or fashion or another. And marriage was solemnised as that in most societies, and 100% of societies throughout the world in the known history of man. It didn't come about through gay marriages, Frank, or gay unions. Sorry, mate. We just solemnised it and made it law. So you're saying, oh, the majority of Australians support gay marriages. Well, Frank, the evidence is not there. It's not there, Frank. Mainly, they probably don't give a stuff. You're right there, but that doesn't mean that they support it, Frank. And accordingly to the last referendums in California and so forth, I'll use California as a prime example. That referendum about gay marriage was defeated, Frank. Sorry, mate. There's another one you got wrong. Now, let's see if you can actually reply to a video without the use of profanity, Frank. I think I covered most of your points. About education, Frank, yes, you are sadly lacking in education, I'm sorry to say. And perhaps you had best read books that actually give you information, not Labor Party rhetoric. Oh, I'm sorry, you left the Labor Party, didn't you? I do apologise because you couldn't get your own way. And the fact is that you continue to use profanity. I'm not surprised the Labor Party didn't like you swearing at them either, any more than anyone else does. Anyway, Frank, have a good day. We'll talk to you some other time when you're prepared to actually produce a video without profanity. Bye now.